Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. An absolute pleasure to be able to speak to you today. Maybe you could kick off with a brief introduction to this film for people who don't know anything about it. What can they expect from Nitram?
Nitram's a film that's based heavily on the real events in 1996 in Tasmania of at the time was one of the largest single mass shootings in Australia, and it was written as an anti-gun film by the author Sean Grant, and you sort of, I guess, follow this particular individual, Nitram, as he sort of makes some horrific decisions. It's got an incredible cast: Caleb Landry Jones and Judy Davis and Anthony LaPaglia and Essie Davis, that are kind of playing out this sort of family drama that exists within it.
And it's a very brave thing to take on such an event and make a film about it. And I know it's something that you were kind of ruminating on for many years. So what was that process like, and why did you decide that Sean's script was finally the best way in to putting this story on screen?
He talked about it years ago when we did Snowtown together, and we both agreed at the time, which was sort of in early 2010, that it was just too difficult to tell, and didn't really understand kind of what that point of view would be for the story. And then he was living in Los Angeles and has had some very close calls with some mass shootings there, and it just sort of, during COVID, it really, I guess, kind of in a fever, he wrote this thing within 2 or 3 weeks. And when I started reading it, I was obviously had a lot of trepidation about it, because I was and still do live in Tasmania, where the shootings happened. But there was just something so familiar about it. I was sort of reading this family that I felt as though I knew. I felt like I knew that suburban street it was set on, and there was just a way in which Sean was writing this that allowed you to sort of start to recognise certain things. And for me, a lot of it was about this one particular scene where Nitram walks into a gun store and buys guns without a license, like he's buying golf clubs. There was just such a kind of profound lead up to that particular scene that sort of said everything to me about sort of why we're making the film and what it was about, and the sort of power that it had. So it was just a really, really great script that I sort of felt as though I had to make. I believed in what it was trying to say, and I trusted Sean and why he wrote it.
And if you can tell us a bit about the title, which I pronounced wrong earlier, didn't I? Nitram, and kind of that way of talking about something in a direct way, but kind of finding a way to avoid using the names of the people involved. So it's kind of direct and indirect at the same time.
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. It was, us really challenging ourselves in regards to infamy and saying this person's name and what that meant. But to be honest, Sean wrote it about sort of identity. We had heard that the person sort of had this derogatory nickname called Nitram, and there was something really interesting in the film about identity and about trying to sort of run from who you think you are or who other people think you are, and this character sort of running from this name and trying to sort of reach out to be part of all these different tribes in Australia. And in particular, in this film, it was sort of this surfing tribe, so the name was sort of so caught up with the power of identity and what that means, and I guess a character's attempt to sort of try to outrun that name as well through the film.
And I guess one of the challenges of making a fictionalized story about a true event is finding that balance between where you're going to rely on the information you have, the facts, the things that are in the public domain, and which parts are going to dramatize. So what was your approach in that respect, and how did you manage to find that good balance?
Yeah, it's probably the trickiest thing. We've done it 3 times now, and Snowtown was our first film was similar, sort of based on a series of crimes with real people attached, and I think you have to be as researched as possible and as respectful as possible to the real events, and then you've also got to kind of understand the film that you're telling and why you're telling it and what that point of view is. So you know, I think we avoid doing anything sort of left field where it doesn't feel plausible within what the events were. But at the same time, I think the particular lens that you have, that where you decide to put the camera and the certain journey that you want to take an audience on, that is definitely sort of tailored within, well, in the writing within Sean's head, but in the directing, I try to give as much sort of freedom as possible to the actors and, you know, to the way we shoot it to you know, speak to the truth of what we're trying to tell.
And do you feel that pressure making a film like this, I guess, from the broader public and their own ideas about these sorts of events, but of course the people closer to it in terms of victims and families and things like that?
Yeah, definitely more than any film I've done. This is one that I was deeply concerned about in regards to how people would respond. And you know, the last thing I want to do is, wanted to do is sort of bring, you know, any pain to people, especially those living in Tasmania. So we tried to, you know, tread very gently and you know, questioned every day some of the choices that we were sort of making, and there's a sort of restraint in the film that I think probably speaks to that a lot. But it's, you know, it's hard when you're making films. But then, you know, this event shook Australia in 1996. It was one of those events everyone knew where they were on that day. It changed this country forever. It changed the gun culture in Australia forever. It was hugely significant, and for many parts of Australia, it's still incredibly hard to talk about. So, you know, when you make a film about this subject matter, it was a very robust debate when you know, people knew we were making the film. So yeah, I sort of lived with you know, the challenges, but also the kind of responsibility of making it. And you know, at times it's, you know, it's been you know, it's been challenging.
And as you said at the beginning, you have such an incredible cast, and each take on their roles, you know, with such commitment, but particularly at the center of it, Caleb. So how did you put this cast together? And particularly, how did you work with him? Because it's not an easy role to take on. And the way he's able to foster the audience's empathy in a very particular way. So how did you work with your broader cast, but in particular, Caleb?
Well, it was really unusual casting him because he's Texan, and to get him to play an Australian is, we were curious about that. But it was interesting. When we first talked about who we thought would be in the film, Caleb was someone that we sort of mentioned more as a kind of type, as, you know, obviously an actor that we deeply admired, but more sort of, there was a physicality about him that we really were attracted to, and then we just thought, well, why not Caleb? And we got on a plane and went to Los Angeles, and we met him, and he'd read the script, and he had some pretty powerful and profound things to say about it. And there was just a feeling about him. And then on set, you know, he's probably one of the most immersive actors I've worked with. He's an actor that, you know, doesn't really have a kind of off button, and really lives something. So, you know, he never dropped the accent while we were doing it the whole time. There was a kind of, I always felt as though there, you know, he was sort of a couple of degrees away from the character constantly, even at the end of the day. So that was pretty astonishing to work with someone like that. Someone so young that, you know, and with a role like this, you really do need to be very sure about why you're doing it and very committed. So, you know, it was one of the great experiences I've had as a director, working with an actor who really, really loves acting and wants to act.
And what do you hope the impact of this film to be? Because, you know, as we're saying, it's kind of shocking to learn, why hasn't more been done? Why hasn't been more to control, gun laws and people's access to guns? And then, of course, we're looking over the pond as well at the US, where this seems to be an issue that's only getting worse and only seeing more kind of shootings and more of a resistance to do anything about it. So in that particular context, it's the specificity of this story, but there's also a broader issue to debate too.
Well, it was interesting when we were making it. I was just constantly thinking about an Australian audience and the context of that, and knowing as soon as someone sat down to watch this, that they kind of knew what they were watching, and every scene would have the context of what they knew would happen at the end. Obviously in Australia, it's about speaking to our history, and there's some pretty dark corners in our history, and this was one of them. And really, I guess, questioning the why the laws changed here, and how they changed, and what led possibly to some of those horrific decisions that this individual made. But then, when we're sort of playing it in America, well, and that's a completely different conversation. It's you start talking to people about gun reform there, and it seems impossible. Not impossible to do. Just there's a kind of hopelessness about it. I mean, how many, mass shootings sort of have to happen before, genuine, serious gun reform or changes happen. So there was, you could feel there was a heaviness to those conversations, and a kind of hopelessness. And obviously, since we've been to America, there's been, a huge incident there. So it always feels as though it's just there. We were filming in 2020 the film, and I remember on our third day of the shoot, the number of mass shootings in America just for that year of 2020 during a COVID year had gone over 480. That's in 1 year. So it's a very different conversation to have than the sort of conversation that you have here in Australia about the film. And I think that's what's so interesting about it. Every country has their own relationship with gun reform and gun culture, and the film speaks in many different ways.
I'm almost out of time, but just wanted to sort of speak to a little bit you seem to have an interest in your films of kind of looking at male violence and what kind of leads people to commit these sorts of things. And I wonder what you think the importance is of cinema and the role it can play in kind of, not having some kind of fear about looking directly at these issues. It's maybe feel like people don't want to revisit these traumatic events and brush them under the carpet, but of course nothing will ever change if we don't do that. So what the effect is of trying to sort of tackle these things on screen.
Well, I think art, and I think cinema is art, I think it should be a place that you can safely investigate and question and put on screen points of view and ideas about violence and about the effects of violence in society. I mean, I think that that ongoing conversation about violence in films is one that continues and evolves, but I think it's an important one to have. At the same time, I think more than any other time, there is more questioning about how violence is played on screen, and what is the responsibility of the writers and the directors to that violence on screen. And that's changed from the first film that I made, Snowtown, in 2010. It's just a very different conversation, and I think that's a good one. I think it puts more responsibility on the filmmakers to really question how they're showing violence on screen, and what the context of it is, and and why. So I think those debates are much more sensitive, but they're also becoming extremely important.
And can you quickly tell us what you might work on next?
Don't know yet. Don't know yet. There's a few things kind of bubbling around, but I'm just trying to sort of work out which is the next one to go.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with me, and can't wait for everyone else to see this really powerful and original and wonderfully made film. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks
Lovely
so much.
to chat to you. See you. Bye. Bye.